Hello and welcome to Roadmap MBA. My name is Ashleigh King and I am so delighted to be with you again. I love these sessions. I've been running them since March at the invitation of my colleague Steve Pugh, who's the founder of Roadmap MBA. So it's really nice to see anyone watching today. If you're here and you're watching, do say hello in the comments. It means I can say hello live while you're here and we can have more of an interactive discussion. So it's worth saying hello for anyone who isn't aware of me or haven't come across me before. So I'm going to be talking today about the cost of living crisis and the real cost of education. But before I do that, as I said, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. I'm also going to introduce the Roadmap MBA. So the Roadmap MBA is on a mission to change people's lives. It's on a mission to change people's view and way of thinking about education, on a mission to help people around the world to build a better life for themselves and to create an accessible platform for all communities to thrive and celebrate together. And I am really into learning. I always have been my whole life. So to be a guest presenter on the show is really important to me. And it's great to see you here, Tony, one of my colleagues, who's also a guest presenter. It's really lovely to have, different perspectives. So we've got myself, Steve and Tony at the moment, and I know that that's only going to grow. But what we're doing is we're sharing our thoughts and our perspectives around different topics. We can talk about whatever we want. So something that might have happened in our week or something we've seen on the news or something that's close to our heart, which is why I've chosen education this morning. But as a team, we're working to get the word out there about Roadmap MBA. So if you haven't heard of it before, it was founded by Steve Pugh, who created this fabulous resource. So here's an example. It's like a book that you can work through, but there's also online resources and materials. Everything goes through. Sorry, when you go through this, you go through it in a very practical, logical way. So you get worksheets, you get exercises that really teach you the practicalities of business education. One of the things I would say from my own experience of studying is that sometimes in class you get a brief overview of something or a topic, but it's so broad that you don't have the time to really understand the concepts. And so I found that although I've done a master's in business administration and MBA, which I loved, some concepts are still only sinking in now because I'm still reading about them and thinking about them and discussing them with colleagues and peers. So it is a great resource and you get online classes. The best thing about it though is when you buy one, you can actually gift one. So you know that you are supporting education all over the world. It's now in over 35 countries. So that's a bit of an introduction to the Roadmap MBA and a bit, I'll share a little bit more about that as well. So if you haven't met me before, my name is Ashleigh King, as I said, and I'm a podcaster. I'm also an entrepreneur. I like to call myself a creative entrepreneur because I'm always been someone who's very involved in creative industries. My favorite industries to work with are the tech sector, the creative folks, and also people who have inspiring stories. So I work with lots of coaches or writers or authors. And often what I do is work with people to help them share their story with the world. That's what I believe I'm here for, my mission. So I do lots of confidence coaching, lots of podcast training, helping people to get their podcast started, audited, set up. So I love doing that. And I have a studio called Flamingo Heights in the Ousbourne in the northeast of England. I like to share what I've been up to recently. So I'm going to go through a couple of bits now. So I can talk about whatever I like on the show. And I really love that because it lets me just think about a lot of things when I'm preparing for this. So one of the things I've been doing is growing my studio. So a year ago, on the 2nd of November, I moved into a studio space. I hadn't expected that so early. It was something I'd hoped for 5 years later, but a few things fell into place and it happened. And I've been thinking a lot about this at the moment because I've been wondering, is it right for me to have a studio? Now, for anyone watching who knows me, don't get me wrong. Don't think that I'm jumping in and closing the doors or anything like that. The reason I've been thinking so much about my studio is is the fact that we're all concerned at the moment about the cost of living crisis. And I'm thinking about the cost of actually how much does it cost me to open the doors to that space? You know, how much am I utilizing it? Could I be doing things better, leaner, smarter? Could I be saving energy? Could I change my light bulbs? Could I adjust different things? And I think one of the things I am grateful for, and it's actually really nice that Tony's just commented, because Tony and a few of my colleagues who were on my MBA cohort actually lent me their support. So Aditya, Denise and Tony, all colleagues of mine, actually spent some of their time, and also my good friend Andrew Patterson, who's in North Carolina, he actually spent time, the four of them, with me, going through my financials, going through how we ran projects and working out, you know, did I want to do things this way? Which were the bits that were going to make me money? How could I run things in the leanest way? And you know, those conversations meant so much to me, and to have my peer support, my network there. So that's one of the things I've been up to, is thinking about, well, how can I grow my studio? How can I grow my team? What kind of foundations do I need? What kind of reputational risk do I want to be careful of? How can I look after myself? How can I look after my team, but also my business? You know, so in the past, I've always wanted to help everyone, but I've been realizing recently, if I am not, if I don't have enough oxygen, as Steve, my colleague, would say, in the business, I can't run a business. So actually, I've been doing a lot of thinking about all of that, and actually, I like to be positive where possible, and I'm grateful for the cost of living crisis, because what it's given me is that it's forced me to become more innovative and to be leaner in my business. So that's something that I've been musing about. I've also been quitting networking, which for many people would be the funniest thing they've ever heard me say. So if you do know me and you may be in the Northeast of England Business Network, you might know that I love to network, and I love to network with a bright fuchsia hat. And I still love my hat. It's a wonderful hat, and I will wear it. I'm just not wearing it today. But one of the things that I wanted to say is I've actually been taking some time away from networking, unless I'm speaking at an event or presenting, or unless my team are taking photographs of video, or we're running something. I've actually been taking time away. And the reason I've been doing that is because I'd been working till 4 a.m. often, trying to fit things in. And I wasn't getting things done, and I just felt that I wasn't being very productive, and I was skint. I was looking at my bank balance, and I was thinking, well, invoices are coming in and cash is coming in, but I'm just so skint. How am I not making any money in my business? When I sat down and looked at a couple of things, as I said, I've been tweaking things. Well, there were some things that I could save money on. For instance, if I go to an event and I'm in a hurry because I haven't left enough time between meetings, I might get a taxi. That could be really expensive. And depending if that's really out of the way and it's dark and I've got heels on, or I'm speaking at something and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to arrive flustered from walking, then I'll get a taxi. And so what I noticed is taxis were one of the first things that I could cut. And even today, you know, coming to the Roadmap MBA, I get a taxi because it's quicker for me rather than getting the bus, which is 3 buses to get here. However, my last taxi to where I'm presenting cost me £30, and that is because of surcharges and traffic and travel increases and petrol and fuel increases. However, what I've found is that that's an Uber thing, and if I look around and use something like Noda or an alternative taxi company, I'm able to actually get a much better price. So today it cost me 15 and I'm ecstatic. So it's just a small thing, but it's just to show that there are always things that you can do in your business to cut costs and to tweak things. And so yeah, I'm really delighted to have been doing that. It's really nice to see you here, Elena. So happy to see you. I know we're chatting about some collaborations, and I'm really looking forward to supporting women in tech. So I wanted to say more about cutting networking. I think networking is really important, but we need to be strategic about how we do it. I'm trying to, for instance, spend more time networking outside of office hours. That means that my clients and customers can get hold of me when they need to during the day. And it also means that I can be smart about where I'm spending my time. Just to wrap up that, you know, whole thought about networking, is I think it's really important to just remember that you know, if you need to be marketing, if you need to be doing finding leads, networking is a great way to do that. But it's also important to remember, do you have a pipeline? What are you doing with those leads? Where are they in your sequence? Because what I was doing, and this is why I've stopped networking, is I had all these leads and I had a fabulous pipeline, but I had no time to look after them or nurture them. So those are my musings on that, but that's something I've definitely been doing less of, and I've been feeling so much calmer and more productive in my business, and the cash flow is looking better for it. I've also been paying back my debt from my time as a student. So the reason I mention that is I'm talking about what I've been up to, and I'm going to be talking about education and the real cost of education today. So yeah, I'm paying back debt from my time as a student, and it looks like I'm going to be doing that for quite a while, which is quite why I'm wanting to choose this topic today. I agree with Chris, who's commented to say it's about picking the right events for you rather than quitting. Yes, actually, Chris, I think that maybe I have used the wrong term there. I wouldn't say I've quit networking, because I'm still going to things that I'm working at and being involved in. But I do think, yes, it's about being strategic with your time, and also making sure that you're going to the right things and not just everything. Yeah. So before I move on from this, I'm going to be talking, as I said, about education, the cost of education today. But this picture, when I started my studies at Newcastle University, I had come up with this idea of a wishing tree with some friends in the marketing team, because I'd been doing an internship there over the summer. And the thing that I'd put on the tree was, I will grow here. And that is absolutely true about my time studying. However, sometimes that growth was against the odds, just due to some of the challenges I experienced, which is something I wanted to talk about today. So we talked about what have I been up to. So last week I had a fabulous opportunity to go and be involved in a student documentary. So when I say that, I'm actually going to take that a step back. So it was a documentary. It was part of the Newcastle International Film Festival. And what it was doing was working with Newcastle University, in particular the Culture Lab, and Dr. Ian MacDonald, who's actually really well known in the film community. He's a really talented filmmaker, and it was really an amazing opportunity to be part of this documentary challenge. So they were bringing people together who've never done documentaries before, who didn't know how to film, who didn't know how to use cameras, who didn't know how to do editing. And I loved this because I got to meet people from all walks of life. And when I say all walks of life, I'm talking people who were in their 60s and 70s, people who were in wheelchairs or had different learned experience, living experiences. I also met a 16-year-old who I was absolutely astounded by, who just loved film so much and was already involved as a screener for certain film festivals. So I went along to this filmmaking challenge, and I was so nervous because I didn't really know anything about how to make a film. So I learned some brilliant things about how to use a camera, how to edit. So although I'm involved in lots of these projects and I can do stuff on my phone, to actually use kit and make something was really powerful. It taught me a lot as well about teamwork, because we had to come up with an idea that we all agreed on. There are some wonderful ideas that were floated. One that I really want to look into is crime and criminality around the cost of living crisis, and that's something I'm hoping to look into in the future. But what we worked on is something around student poverty, and that's why I chose this topic to talk about today, because it really touched me when we were talking to students and hearing their stories. So I would say that we joke that this is the title, the poor bairns have nowt. And if you're from the northeast of England, you're probably laughing and howling at my accent trying to say bairns, because I can't say it properly. But the truth is, this is a saying in the northeast: shy bairns get nowt, which means if you don't ask, you don't get. And this is a bit of a play on words with that, to say that actually the poor kids have nothing. And this is looking at student poverty and the cost of living crisis. So this documentary is being made. It's very light touch. It's going to be 5 to 10 minutes long. And I really love this quote, which is an oldie but a goodie. I'm a huge Dickens fan. I love the way that Charles Dickens used commentary to talk about social matters. A lot of his work at times, if you look back, can feel ajar with what we believe right now. So sometimes there's certain things I don't like about his writing, but I also love his social commentary. So one of his sayings was, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, and it was the age of wisdom and it was the age of foolishness. And what a great way to sum up university for many folks. So those are some of the things that I've been up to. I want to launch into my topic now. But before I do that, I've got some other comments that I wanted to say, or announcements. So I wanted to tell you about something called Purple Sock Day, which is really cool. So here's 3 examples. These are created by Parallel. These are purple socks. You can buy them online. They are for supporting people with disabilities. So there's something called the Purple Pound, which you may or may not be aware of, but so many people across the UK are part of our consumers that we don't think about. You know, so we have people who will be spending money, who want to be included, who want to have the same access as everyone else, but they're often forgotten about. So Purple Sock Day is to raise awareness of the International Day of Disabilities. The correct title is International Day of Disabled People, which is going to be held on the 3rd of December. I'm really excited because on that day I'm releasing a special podcast I did with my friend Catherine, who's a disabled seamstress. So she creates beautiful clothing for people who have accessibility needs, and it means that they can address their dresses to be on the right carpet without tripping with their wheelchairs and things like this. And I'm so excited to share more about that soon. So do check out Purple Sock Day. You can buy these online, and Steve's actually bought like 25 pairs that he's been giving out. So I think that's super, super cool. So that was one of the announcements I wanted to make. The other announcement I did want to share is that I'm really, really touched by something, and this is to do with poverty actually. So I read something this morning, and one of my friends, Peter George Bell, shared something. So it was a Financial Times article talking about the cost of living and crisis, but it was talking about actually luxury goods are going up. That's what the stats say. So if we look at champagne and luxury handbags, these markets are going, you know, there are sales. They're reporting really no change in their spends, and I'm wondering what that's about. And I'm wondering if part of that is because perhaps people are not trusting banks or gold or things like this, or cryptocurrency with all the stuff that's going on in the news. Perhaps people are buying luxury goods that they feel they will only get more valued with time. So that was really interesting to me, but it also made me think about the wealth gap and inequality, which we'll be talking about as one of the themes of my presentation today. And so what I wanted to say is, for me, I've never really been massively into luxury things. It's not that I don't appreciate them, it's just that it's not one of my values. It doesn't really matter to me. But somebody gifted me something and it meant so much to me that I'm overwhelmed in a way that it means more to me than any luxury bag could. So I wanted to show you, this is an example of one of my lovely friend Olivia's bags. So this isn't the one she's gifted me, this is one I bought from her. I've actually got 4 bags from her, 2 of which were gifts. So this looks like an ordinary handbag, except it's made out of newspaper that's been lovingly upcycled. So it would have just gone in the trash. And she's plaited it into pattern and varnished it, and I adore it because it's beautiful and it's strong and it's special and it's unique because it's mine. But what I love about it is it's upcycled, so it's saving the planet. And even more is her story. So Olivia was trafficked, and her way to get out of being trafficked and to reclaim her story was to actually create these bags, because by doing something creative, she's reclaiming her voice and her story. So what happened is I bought this bag a while ago and I was so excited because the reason I love it is it's made out of newspaper, and I love to write, and I also just love the environmental, you know, meaning of it, to be able to use something and reuse something. But what happened was she didn't feel like it was good enough, even though I love it. So she made me 2 new ones. I don't have them with me, but they are, in her words, just for me, because they're flamingo colours. So what she's done is she's taken floristry wrap that you would use in supermarket flowers and things like that, and interwoven that with newsprint, and they are just so beautiful and so stunning. And to me, the time and effort that's gone into that means much more than any luxury bag could. So one day I would love to have a Dior or a Chanel or whatever it is that I choose to buy at that time. But right now, I want to say that there will never be a bag that's more special to me. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Olivia, because I think that's really beautiful. Just looking at some of the comments coming in. Yeah, people aren't always rational. Luxury spending is on the rise because the wealth divide is still growing. That is so true. We are seeing a massive increase of the gap between rich and poor. And I think that, to me, was prevalent by the work that we did in this filming documentary that I was telling you about. So actually we spoke to around 5 to 7 students around the campus, and just hearing their thoughts. And I'm going to talk about some of that now, but I was really, really shocked by some of the stories. So as I mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about the cost of living crisis and the real cost of education. And I just want to explore this. I'm not saying one thing's right or wrong. I just want to ask some questions, and I want to hear your stories and your thoughts. So if you are a student, please feel free to join us. If you are working as an academic and you have thoughts on the matter, if you are a parent and you're worried about your kids, if you think that students just live off the taxes, please drop your comments too. All comments are welcome, but I'm really interested in hearing what you think. So everyone is experiencing worries about the cost of living crisis in their own way. It's a hot topic. You see it all over the news. For me, I'm really honest. I've been worried about this a lot. I was feeling really anxious about this last Friday. I actually was looking for something on the budget when it was announced, and I watched Steve's message, and I thought about the government potentially offloading stuff to the future, to future governments, and I just felt really concerned and anxious about the cost of living crisis. And I thought to myself, well, what do I want to do? I want to do this topic. I want to talk about it. I definitely want to do something around criminal behavior, because I think that's a really important topic. I do want to shout out hi back Thailand. It's really nice to see you here. Yeah, I think it's really important that in all this noise about the cost of living crisis, we also support each other and try to be positive where we can, and look for the good news as well. And so this is something that I really wanted to talk about. So why is this topic important to me particularly? Well, I recently graduated. I mean, it's 2022 now. I graduated last year actually, because my class was a COVID class. So we experienced, the pandemic, and halfway through our studies had to work from home and study from home. So I would say that I've only graduated a year ago in 2021, because we had a delayed graduation. And so for me, this is still really relevant. I feel like I just graduated recently. I'm still in touch with a lot of students in the student body. I'm an alumna of Newcastle and Northumbria University, so I really care about this. But also, as someone in my own community, I'm interested in the students and the people around me and what they might be going through. So what challenges are students facing? So as I mentioned, we spoke to around 7 students, and this was, short interview style questions, and asking them what it's been like for them. So one of the things that came up was the choice that people are having to make between paying rent and buying groceries. We should not live in a society anywhere in the world, but in the UK and in a wealthy country, where we have students who don't know if they can actually pay their rent. They anxious and hiding from their landlords. They worried about their mom and picking up phone calls from their mom and catching up with their news because they worried that they can't support their parents because their parents are struggling. They don't know if they can afford to buy bread because they might not have enough for rent. This to me really, really is a concern. And I think there's a great comic, if anyone's seen it. It's about privilege, and it's about the concept of privilege from a wealthy perspective and a poor perspective. And it talks about, how many kids are having to work second, third, fourth jobs just to get by to support their education. I'll tell you a secret about me that's really embarrassing. So when I was a student in 2008, in the last financial crash, I actually didn't have much money. My student loan forms had gone in late. I was waiting for my student loan. I had rent to pay. And so I started working at Nando's, and I was just doing as much hours as I could to kind of support myself. And so I would skip classes to go and work. And one of the things that I used to do, and it's so embarrassing, I would wash my hair with dishwashing liquid, which is probably not that big a deal. I mean, people have probably used worse, but in a world where lots of people sell fabulous, expensive shower gel, to wash your hair with dishwashing liquid feels kind of strange. But yeah, I think kids and students now are really struggling with this. I'm horrified that there is a choice between rent and food. And this is not, this issue, the cost of living crisis, is not just about students. We know that this touches all parts of our lives. I just particularly want to talk about students today because education's on my heart today. So we're looking at an increasing wealth gap between rich and poor, and what that might mean in reality from some of the student voices that we discussed or heard their stories, is that actually you may have the experience of being a kid from a northern city and maybe going to a university in the south of England and finding that you may be judged for your accent, for speaking a certain way. This can also be true of any going from one place to another. You also have the issue of people feeling like they have to compare and they have to try and compete with their friends, not having enough money. So perhaps everyone's going out for a meal and you maybe thought that, okay, I might get some chips after a night out, but actually one of the girls described her experience as people going for banquets of food. For her, when she was asked, well, what do you want? She would say, well, what's the absolute cheapest that I can get on this menu? I don't want a banquet of food. I don't want to pay £30 for a meal. And I also don't want to be in the position where I'm having to split the bill with folks who've had steaks and wine and all these things. And so I suppose the question here is, are we sending our kids, I don't have kids yet, but kids as a collective term, are we sending students to university with financial education, with any experience of budgeting, with any knowledge around how to support themselves? So if you've got the money to go for an expensive meal, great, but are we having students who are getting their student loan, have never had money before, and they all think they've got lots of money, and then in several months or weeks, they're absolutely destitute, but they're too embarrassed to tell their friends? Are these issues that we are experiencing? We've had a comment, going into full-time education means one less money earner in a family in the short term, but maybe higher earning potential in the future. That is so true. It's important. There is a trade-off. That time that you're in education, it's a short-term experience, but it has long-term benefits. At the same time, the opportunity cost, which I'm going to cover in a few minutes, is so important when we consider this. So for me, the increasing wealth gap, I think I really resonated with that, because when I was a student, I remember many examples of people going out all the night all the time, going shopping, grabbing, coffees, just having a really fabulous time. And I felt that I just didn't fit in. Because if I wasn't out, then I wasn't making friends. And one of the students that we spoke to said that she felt there would always be this collective university experience. She'd expected her peers to be struggling along or on a budget or, all together in the same boat. And what she found was that for her, she had a student loan and she had to stretch that for a whole year. Across the semesters when she got her installments and cover her rent. But for many of her peers, they were getting subsidized by family or parents or, other things. So I think it is important to remember that we all have a different starting point. And this was really apparent for me as a student when it was during the pandemic, because what had happened is I was one of the only students in my class who worked the entire time I was doing my MBA. So a master's in business administration is notoriously intense. It's a very busy course to be studying. And I was the president of a student society as well as working the entire time. And I, to my detriment, burnt out, made myself sick and very ill. And I would say that was because in hindsight, I could have saved more pre-studying. I could have done things in a lot of different ways that I have hindsight now, which is a gift. But what I would say is it put pressure on my family, it put pressure on my husband, it put pressure on my friends. I didn't see my friends. And I think what I didn't anticipate was the pandemic. I didn't anticipate that all of the work that I planned to do, such as, I wasn't opposed to doing anything to help get some extra cash in, like serve ice cream or sell coffee or anything, wait tables. I was happy to do all of that. But all of a sudden, when you can't do any of those activities because you can't go anywhere because there's a pandemic, there was no way then to make that rent or to pay those bills. So I do think it's really important for us to think when we have our wonderful opportunities for students to study, what is it that we're sending them to, and how are we equipping our students with the skills that they need? So one of the things is, naturally, if you can't pay your rent and you're buying you can't buy groceries, you might get a job, which is great. But that might mean that you might be doing 2 or 3 jobs. You might not be telling your friends that you're quitting classes or skipping classes to go and work, because you might not want them to know that. But then what that means is you're going out, keeping up with your friends, and then you're also working all the time. So your studies slip. Also, your academic performance can be impacted because you're just tired. You're trying to burn the candle at both ends. Your friendships suffer, your personal relationships suffer. And I think this can be seen most when students move away from home, from a hometown, and move into another city, because all of a sudden you can reinvent yourself, and any of the things that you struggled with, you can pretend they don't exist anymore. But that can be an issue, because it can feel like, well, actually, everything's fine, but it's not. And without the support structures of mom and dad around, or other people who care about you, that can be quite difficult. So a lot of students that we spoke to talked about their academic performance suffering, burnout struggles, because they were doing multiple jobs. They were struggling to keep up with their assignments. In fact, we also spoke to some of the Newcastle University Student Union representatives who said that there was a massive increase at the moment in actual personal extenuating circumstance forms, PEC forms, where people ask for an extension on something. They've actually now allowed a cost of living scenario. You can actually choose. So you might say in the past, well, it's a personal issue, or it's medical, or a family member had passed, but now you can actually choose cost of living crisis as one of the reasons that your academic performance is suffering and you might need an extension. So that is really really sad to hear. I wonder if the typical university experience is changing, and this is just a question, again, answer in the comments. And the whole point of this presentation is for us to have a discussion and to have a chat about these things. But is there a switch from drinking? Do we still have that culture? Lots of students are telling me they can't afford to go out, so they they might go out, but they might just not drink alcohol, or they're looking for more wholesome activities, I guess, like going and playing board games or tea crawls around the city, you know, if there's anywhere that sells tea late at night. I think as well, there's much more international students, there's much more interfaith communities that want to meet and mingle and connect. There does seem to be a change in behaviors, and we've seen that in some of the stats of how alcohol sales have gone down in terms of beer and certain things. Young people do seem to want more experiences than things. We have got students dropping out. That is not a new thing, but unfortunately it is an increasing thing. So we are seeing higher numbers of students dropping out. What is typical anyway? What is a typical university experience? So one of the students that I spoke to for this documentary was saying, well, I had this idea that we would all be in the same boat and it was all going to be a particular way and it was going to be a universal student experience, and actually it wasn't. I didn't feel like that. One of the things that had upset her the most, and I wonder if this is something that might shock anyone else, but was that certain postcodes in the UK may get extra support because they are deprived areas. And what was happening is that some parents were buying houses in deprived areas so that they could say that their kids had lived in that space, so that their kids would get extra support and extra money while they were at university, even though they had a second or third house. And to me, that's really shocking, that we're in a situation where we've got people who really need that extra help, those extra grants, that extra support. I can't believe that we're living in a world like that, but that was deeply shocking to her to hear that story from someone whose parent had done that. But also, you know, are we taking advantage of our systems that we have to help us? What we're seeing as well is the rise of the campus food bank, and this is not an isolated thing. So both Newcastle and Northumbria universities have food banks, and I find this deeply shocking. I'm also really moved by the food bank at Newcastle University. I haven't seen the one at Northumbria, but I know the one at Newcastle University is called the Pantry. You can go along as a student. It's a new initiative this September. You can help yourself to food, tea, coffee, items to make things. You can get files, you can recycle stationery. There are sanitary items if you need them. There's soap, toothbrushes, toothpaste. And it's sad to me that we actually need to be in a space where our students need to be able to get free soap and free toothbrushes and free sanitary towels. I think it's an incredible initiative to support students, but it saddens me how much it's needed. So in some of the filming that I was doing for this documentary, we spent a lot of time around the student union and the pantry, and what was really jarring to me, it felt so contradictory, was the sound of the co-op behind me, where there were such big queues of people who were buying their lunch, and all you could hear was the sound of people scanning things through the till. So just that kind of click kind of sound that you hear of someone using a cash machine. And then on the other side of the room, you've got a pantry where people can go and help themselves. And one of the crew that I was filming with actually went along and filled up the shelves with as much as he could. And that really moved me as well, because he has various disabilities and he used his own money to, and his disability check, because he's unemployed, to help support these students. And what was incredible was the very next day, all of that was gone. So the students, from what we observed, we saw 5 to 6 people an hour at least using the space. But what was even more moving was that many students would only take 1 or 2 items. There was no sense of greed. There was no sense of, I'm coming here and I'm going to take everything away. It was more a case of, someone else needs things more than I do. And I can't believe that we need this. We're in such a wealthy country. It makes me quite emotional, because I get angry. And I've seen some of the comments come in, you know, universities have food banks, but vice chancellors are on, massive amounts of money a year, and that's true. And you know, I worked in a university for a long time, so I will say that I do think vice chancellors work very hard. However, and they have a lot of responsibility. However, I still think that this is wrong. I think that something has to shift in our society. Something has to be different. I wanted to share some hopefully helpful ways to save some money. So yes, you can go to the food bank, and I think that's important. But things like buying food at local markets is such an important thing. So fresh fruit and veg or fresh meat if you need it. One of the things that makes me really sad is hearing how many restaurants are going bust, how many small markets are going bust, how many stores are closing because of the cost of living crisis. I've made a decision recently that wherever possible, I'm going to try not to buy from Tesco or Sainsbury's anymore. I love those stores. I think they're brilliant. You know, they're a British staple and we should be proud of them. But what I do know is that I would rather support a small market stall that needs that money much more than anyone else. And I know that by making those choices, it might take me a little bit of extra effort to go into town and do things that way. I know that by making that choice, it will keep the markets alive. I'm really genuinely concerned about the longevity of our markets and parts that make ordinary folks' lives better. I also know that, you know, speaking to a lot of people about butter has been such a big thing that people are really worried about. So I work with lots of bakers, or you know, I follow lots of bakers, and just the cost of butter, chocolate chips, all these different items used in baking. I think a lot of luxury goods that we might not consider luxury, but homemade scones or cakes, I think we're going to start seeing these prices more and more. Another thing that I love to do, which helps me save money as a student and might help you, is to swap clothes. So it's sometimes called a swish party or a swap party. I'm a big fan of vintage. Everything I wear is pretty much vintage. I love to use upcycled, recycled things. And as a student, that was really helpful for me because I didn't need to buy any clothes. I would just go and swap them with my friends, and we'd have tea and coffee, and we'd go to someone's house and we'd just swap our clothes. But it's a great way to update your wardrobe without spending anything. So that's a really good tip, or just vintage fairs in general. I think one of the things that really struck me about campus is, if you consider that we were all doing this filming thing for a week, we weren't officially students, so we didn't have a student card. We couldn't go and sit in a library or go into any of the university spaces set aside for students. It was kind of like an outreach program. So we had a great place that we could work in when we could use it. However, I actually spent quite a lot of money on coffees because it's so simple, but I forgot to bring a flask. So if you can make your own coffee and take coffee in, I think we've forgotten a lot of these simple things that make such a difference. Taking your own lunch in, taking your water bottle, taking a flask in. And I think part of that is because we spent so much time inside, locked in during the pandemic. So we've forgotten a lot of our ways of saving money and our skills. But I think what happens is that for me, for instance, you know, I needed to keep warm and it was so cold. The weather's awful at the moment. It's raining and there was nowhere to sit. And so on some occasions I found I was going to, you know, like the Northern Stage, which is really nice. And I was having a coffee there and working on my laptop, but it's expensive to get a drink. And I think this is something that a lot of students maybe don't share or don't talk about, is the pressure of, say, if you're going to sit with your friends in a coffee shop, that's great, but can cost a fortune. There are some comments about students scared of putting the heating on. I am so with you on that. I don't put my heating on. I wear warm, cozy pajamas and hot water bottles. And even with not using the heating, and maybe we don't have a dishwasher, so just washing dishes, so heating the water up, I have one bath a week. We can go through £6 a day in gas, and I just don't understand it. So that's not including electricity. So I think there is a lot of fears for students. The other thing as well that we really need to think about is student housing. Is it up to scratch? We've got issues with mold. We've got issues with people getting really ill. We've had a death of a young child recently due to mold. And landlords often aren't, or housing associations aren't always taking responsibility for things. And I think this is a really important thing for us to think about when we're worried about mold and worried about damp, and then we're worried about not putting the heating on. These are all issues that feed into each other, so we do need something drastic to change. Another way that you can support yourself if you are a student, or even if you're not a student but you're looking for some positivity, I think it's important to join a society if you can. So when I was a student, I mentioned I was president of the TEDx Society. Myself and my colleague Gabrielle, we led this amazing society. It was TEDx at Newcastle University. And it was really special because we got to meet people from all over the world and be part of a really inclusive international society. But also, we did lots of fun things, like we made shoe boxes full of goodies and toiletries and clothing for the homeless and things like that. And that was really special because we used our collective effort, even though we didn't have much, to help give what we could back. And I think this is really important if you can, to give back. Helping others and volunteering can really help you to see the hope in what can feel quite scary. A lot of students are struggling not only with money, but when we spoke to them, with their mental health as a result of a lack of funds. So if you can reach out to people, then I think it's really important. I always like to think about research and what does the research say, and what do we think about this from an academic standpoint. And there's something I wanted to touch on that really had me guessing if we're in the right place in terms of education. So one of the points that I wanted to raise is that there was a report in the 1960s. It was called the Robbins Report, and it was all about access to education. And it was an argument that everyone who wanted to study should have the opportunity to study. And before that report was written, everybody who went to university tended to be from very, very wealthy backgrounds. But the Robbins Report actually challenged for wider access to education. And this is why you'll see universities will have, they call them widening participation schemes, opportunities where you can get support to go to university. So we spoke about deprived neighborhoods and postcodes getting, extra support, extra funding or grants. And I think this is wonderful. And this used to be a much bigger thing. However, in the past, we've had funded education through our government. We've had grants or access to education. Our tuition fees have gone from £3,000 to £9,000, and I suspect they're only going to go up very soon. And I just wonder how we can do something differently. I was really delighted to hear that Newcastle, one of the universities in Newcastle, Northumbria University, has recently won the University of the Year in the Times Higher Education listings. And I think this is really important because at one point, polytechnical schools, schools that weren't red brick universities, were seen as the poor, hand-me-down sort of cousins of the red brick universities. And what I'm really delighted to see is that one of our local universities is doing so well as a research-intensive university. I'm an alumna of both Northumbria and Newcastle, and I'm delighted to see that they are really challenging the way education is done. They've put a lot of time and energy and effort into their online learning platforms. One of the things that I think COVID provided for many institutions was a shake-up in how education is delivered. For many people, they relied on lecture theatres and face-to-face teaching. COVID gave us the opportunity to learn how to do things differently. But I would say that universities are still very far behind, and that's why you will see lots of disruptors in the market who do want to shift how we think about education. And actually, when you know that you can study from home, around your studies, around your kids, whenever you want, isn't that better? And I mentioned I would be talking today about the opportunity cost of studying. let me say I absolutely loved my degree. I loved studying a master's in business administration. I loved doing a BA honours in leadership and management at Northumbria. Both of those things I did around very busy workloads. With the first undergrad degree, I was working full-time and studying, and it was quite difficult. I also got married during that time. I don't even know how I did it going back. My second degree, I decided I would do full-time, but I worked as much as I could around that. And I also became president of a society so I could gain the experience of managing a busy workload, because I wanted to know what it would be like if I was ever a CEO, and what it would be like to manage lots of things. And I think what I didn't realize until now, and again, hindsight's a great thing, but the opportunity cost of education is phenomenal. So if you haven't heard of that term before, let me explain it briefly, because I only found it during my studies. So I was doing an accounting module in my MBA, and I was really, really surprised to learn this term, opportunity cost, because I'd never heard of it before, and at the time I wasn't doing the best with my accounts, so I learned a lot in those classes about how not to run a business or how to tweak mine. But one of the things it talked about is when you're doing something, you could be doing something else, and that has an opportunity cost. And this has helped me so much in my business, because now if I say no to something, if I don't believe it's right, if I'm asked to work for free, or if I'm if it doesn't work for me, if I don't necessarily like the values of the person that I'm working with, I will say no. And the reason I will say no is because there's an opportunity cost attached to that. Because if I say yes to that piece of work, I may resent that work or just not enjoy it. But also it's really important that whatever you do, you weigh up what are the costs around that. What if something else comes in that you'd prefer to do? What are the transport costs involved in that activity? What are the how are you going to do what you need to do? What about the workload balance? What's the opportunity cost to your family and your friends? What's the opportunity cost to your relationship? These are all things that I wish that I had thought about before. And I think a lot of people go to university because they feel that we have to do it because it's a rite of passage and it's this important thing that you have to do. And it is a really valuable thing, and you learn how to manage your time, and you learn how to negotiate friendships and relationships, and you make mistakes, and that is absolutely priceless to have those opportunities. But there's something I believe deeply wrong with having situations where our students are having to decide between food and rent and somewhere to sleep. I just don't think that's right. And I'm wondering if anyone else is seeing this, worried about this, worried about their kids at university, and wonders what can we change? Is it a government thing? Is it a university thing? What do we do? Some of the things that went through my mind as a student is I can't talk about this. I can't possibly tell my friends that I can't make it to my next assignment. I can't tell my friends that I don't have any money and I need to do another 3 shifts, or, it was so lonely, and my mental health really suffered. And I will say that lots of universities will have student wellbeing teams. So if you are a student and you need extra help, go and look at your student wellbeing team. But at the same time, these resources are already so much in demand. You've got waiting lists. So how do we support our people? How do we support our academics who are paid a lot of money, but also are marking extra amount of work? The volume the volume of work and workload for many academics is quite extraordinary. One of my favorite professors was sharing with me once how much she is expected to do in terms of the research quality papers that she's expected to produce in very short time frames, as well as teach and write. And this is the challenge when we have research and we also have teaching, because to have the blend of both can be challenging. The administrative burdens that are on academics, which should be more with professional. This is why I wonder if there's a different way to do things. It's true there's some comments coming in about university overheads being too high, needing to rethink the whole structure. I think a lot of people are starting to ask, what is a university in 2022? You know, what are we paying for? We have a lot of administrative functions, but are they productive? Are they delivering what they should? So we've had a comment come in about living off the grid and support towards fuel. Yeah, it's really interesting that there are various grants that seem to be rolled out daily from the government on extra payments that people will get towards their gas or their fuel. And I'm wondering how we're funding these things as well. It's a really valid point. Good comment, Shelley. Yeah, I mean, all of this is really valid. I think that we need to think about as a society what we can do differently, how we can prepare our young people, how we can equip them. What I found very interesting, and I'm not criticizing, but when I looked at Newcastle University and the guidance they had on the cost of living crisis, they were more focused on how to teach young people how to look after their money. You know, the students were able to access a free course on budgeting, which I think is important. However, what was more interesting to me is that the student union spoke more about how to get help if your landlord's not, you know, following the right way of doing things, how to access the student pantry, how to access transport discounts. It felt much more practical and tangible to me. And I wondered if we are saying, well, students are skinned and they don't have lots of money because they just go out and party and they don't have, you know, any grasp on their money, and it's actually, there isn't a poverty issue, it's a money management issue. And I don't think that's the case. I think that students have always gone out and had fun, and I think that that is part of the lesson of university, to learn how to manage your money and sometimes make the wrong decisions. But I don't think that we're set up for success, and I think what we're going to see is a broadening of this gap between rich and poor. And I would love to see our politicians, our government, our policymakers and our universities doing more about this. And I'd love to see what you think. So, you know, if you would love to chat about this more with me, drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's the best way to get a hold of me. Or, you know, leave a comment and I'll try and respond later. This topic was really important to me and close to my heart. And that's one of the reasons why I love being a guest trainer for Roadmap MBA, because it means that I also get to listen to other people's experience around the world and learn about what they think of business topics. And it also means that we know that people are learning, you know, in communities all over the world, in over 35 countries. I think it's also important to say that while there will be disruptors such as Roadmap MBA and other things, there is still a space for universities. They absolutely should exist. This is not to replace that. This is to offer a different way for people who want to work and study without the huge opportunity costs, who want to still look after their family without sacrificing everything. I'm just wondering sometimes, is the sacrifice worth it when we are in freezing, you know, dorms without any heating and we're going to the library just to keep warm? I don't think that's why we go to university. So those are my thoughts for today. Thank you so much to anyone who's tuned in or commented. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you actually next week. I'll be talking about social enterprise and how you can create shared value. Thank you.